Good morning and welcome to another event in our Tech Talk series. Today's event will cover Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com and the Force.com Flex framework. Before we begin, I have to share the safe harbor statement with you to let you know that Salesforce.com is a publicly traded company, and therefore we do need to share the safe harbor statement with you to let you know that any forward-looking statements are just that, forward-looking statements. If you have any questions regarding this safe harbor statement, you can find it on our website under the Investor Relations section. So with that, I would like to introduce Marcus Spotton.
Well, thanks a lot. Good morning from the U.S. West Coast. It's an early morning, but of course we're happy to have you here with us to talk about this important technology update. Before we get started, I want to mention that at the very end of this webinar, there is actually going to be a survey where we want to collect your feedback, and there's a little thank you for participating and also providing feedback. We will give away two Adobe CS5 Master Collection. So stick around for that at least. And of course, besides all the knowledge that you can gain from this webinar, there's also a chance that you can actually get a CS5 Master Edition. All right. So as you know, Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com has been out there for quite some time now. We had a developer preview release at the end of last year, and we just released the general available release a couple of months ago. And so this is basically an update on where we are with Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com. But given that some of you may actually be new to the topic of Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com and Salesforce.com in general, I thought we kick it off with a review of what is Salesforce.com and what is Adobe, and then we're going to go straight into the Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com piece. But so if we look into Salesforce.com, obviously you know that we're very well known for our cloud computing model. So we are a multi-tenant cloud service. And, the things that you usually get from us are, a multi-tenant kernel, and then, our applications and whatever you build on our multi-tenant cloud computing model updates automatically. It's subscription-based, so you pay as you go. And one of the things that's also pretty amazing is that our cloud computing model is very elastic. So it really scales from, let's say, 2 or 3 users that use our cloud computing model to build something or to run applications to over like 50, 60,000 users, and they basically all connect to the same service. Recent analysis by industry-leading companies have shown that we're 5 times faster at half the cost. So we think the cloud computing model is the right model. And if you look a little bit more into the details of Salesforce.com, obviously, at the very top, you see the applications that we're probably most well known for, like, for example, the Sales Cloud, the Service Cloud, the Custom Cloud, which is our Force.com platform, and then also our latest edition in terms of cloud, which is the Chatter Collaboration Cloud, kind of like a social network for the enterprise. But if we look actually from the bottom up, at the very bottom there, you see our multi-tenant kernel that I just talked about. And then, of course, you get our cloud infrastructure. And those are all the things that are typically in a lot of things that we talk about not regarded as the non-fun stuff. So, things like, certifications that we have to go through and that we provide, things like our, proven reliability. We make sure that our service is available 99.9%. Our, query optimizer to make sure that whatever you run on our platform runs very performant. So all of these things that you would typically have to take care of if you run stuff on site, we take care of for you so that you can actually worry about the innovation. And then so if you go to the next level up, you see, there's our development platform. And as part of that, you obviously get like an online database. You get, for example, also programmable user interface with our Visual Force language and a programmable cloud logic with our Apex code. And so on and so forth, real-time analytics. So, all these things you can automatically add to whatever you built on our platform. And then, like I said before, the latest addition to our infrastructure is the collaboration platform. So think of it as, we basically give you kind of like a Facebook style, or we give you Facebook style features that are also automatically enabled in whatever you build on our infrastructure and our platform. So, for example, if you build a custom application, it's automatically social enabled, where you have feeds on any object that you create. You can share content. There's a Chatter API, obviously, just like our regular Force.com API. And then there's also pre-built integration with things like Google, Facebook, and Twitter. So this is kind of what the Salesforce.com landscape looks like, the lay of the land, if you will. And now I'm happy to introduce James Ward from Adobe Systems, and he will give us an overview of the Adobe Flash platform.
Great, thanks, Marcus. So Salesforce has done a great job building the server-side cloud infrastructure piece for this next generation of software. Adobe's been focusing on the client side and how do we create really great applications on the user experience side, and how do users interact with those applications, and how do we deploy those through the cloud, and then how do we run those applications on a number of different mediums, whether it's in the web, on the desktop, on a mobile device, possibly on a TV or in a car or on a yacht. There's lots of different places we can take these applications and run them on the client. So this platform that Adobe has created is called the Flash platform, and there's a number of different pieces of this platform that I wanted to walk through. So first, the most important part is the actual client runtimes, and these are how we actually run these applications on the client. So Flash Player is our primary web runtime, so that's how we actually run these applications inside the browser and make them work and be deployed just like any other web application. Adobe Air is our runtime for installed applications. So this is either installed on the desktop or installed on mobile devices. And really, these are both based on the same APIs, same virtual machine. It's just that when you're on the desktop or on a mobile device installed, then you have more permissions and access to more APIs. So that's really the way that we actually execute these applications is in these virtual machines. And then in order to build applications natively for these virtual machines, we have an open source SDK called Flex, and that really provides the compiler, debugger, and all the components that you need to build applications. So that's really the core framework that's used to actually for developers to use to build these applications. Then Adobe also has some professional tools that allow developers to more easily use that open source Flex SDK to build applications for those runtimes. So the Adobe Flash Builder tool is an Eclipse-based tool that really provides great IDE functionality around the Flex SDK. And we'll see a demo of that in just a little bit. So let's talk a little bit more about how Flex actually works. So with Flex, what we have is two different programming languages that developers use to build applications. The primary language of Flex is called ActionScript. And the ActionScript language is, despite its name, ActionScript, it's actually a real object-oriented language, very much like Java or C#. It includes the ability to have real classes and extend other classes and implement interfaces and all the typical things that you'd expect from a modern object-oriented language. So that's really the core language, and we'll see some of that code in a little bit. Then we also have a declarative language called MXML, and this is really just a simple XML-based language that lives on top of ActionScript that allows a developer to instantiate ActionScript objects and set properties on them in a declarative manner. And so this makes it really easy for a couple things. First, it makes it easy for developers to quickly prototype applications and do layouts in a declarative way. But it also allows some of the other Adobe creative tools to create this declarative markup and then hand it off to a developer so that then the developer can write the code to actually hook it back up to a cloud infrastructure or backend server. And so that's what we'll see in some code in a little bit. So what happens with Flex is the developer writes a bunch of code, uses a bunch of the out-of-the-box Flex components, possibly uses other third-party components, but then they run the Flex compiler, and what that does is that generates a Swift file. That Swift file is the binary bytecode application that works cross-platform, and this is the application that will actually run client-side in the virtual machine. So you take that Swift file and you put it up onto a web server. You can put that up on the Force.com infrastructure, your own web server, wherever you want to put that. And then a user visits a web page, and that Swift file downloads to the client and then executes client-side in the browser in Flash Player. And once it's executing client-side, we have to have some way really to get data from the server to the cloud and then be able to make updates to the data. And there's a bunch of different options for how you can do that. When we're dealing with Force.com, we're actually using the SOAP APIs and RESTful APIs that Force.com provides. And then we've wrapped up those APIs into a nice ActionScript API that makes it really easy for developers to deal with those web service calls without having to think about SOAP and all the stuff that's going on behind the scenes. So that's the basic infrastructure of how Flex application works. In the browser, now let's talk about installed applications with Adobe Air. So in a similar way, developers write code, they run it through the same Flex compiler, but in this case, we're going to generate a Swift file, and then we're going to put that Swift file into a package called an Air file, and that Air file is our cross-platform installer for that application. So we'd put that Air file up onto a web server or email it to someone, however we want to get it to them. They then would actually install that application, and now just like before, that application is going to run client-side in the Air runtime, and then make calls over the network, SOAP calls or whatever, to talk to cloud infrastructure. But then, because it's running on the desktop as an installed client or on a mobile device, it has access to additional APIs. So things like file system access, native drag and drop, a local SQLite database for doing offline applications, system notifications, system clipboard access, all the things we can't do inside the browser because of the browser security model. So that's really what Air gives us the advantage of over the web. The great thing is that we can build applications that can run both in the browser and outside the browser and reuse code and just have additional APIs that are available when we're running as an installed application. So now I'll hand it back to Marcus, and we'll start getting into more details for how this all actually works with Force.com.
All right, thanks a lot, James. I thought, maybe one nice thing actually, given that we talked about, Flash and Air or Flex and Air, let me show you one application that we actually as Salesforce.com built on Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com, which is actually an Air application. And as I said earlier, the latest addition to our clouds is the Chatter Collaboration Cloud. And, like I mentioned also, it's a social network for the enterprise. And as, of course, any social network like Twitter, Yammer, we wanted to have a desktop client, right? Because sometimes it's very difficult to stay on top of, all the things that happen in your feed if you're dependent on the browser. And so what we ended up writing is what we call the Chatter desktop. And if I launch it here, if it would actually launch. There we go. So you see it's in essence a desktop application. It's completely written on Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com. It runs on my desktop as an Air application. And in essence, what I see in here is, my news feed or my Chatter feed. So all the things that are going on in my Chatter network. Currently, I'm logged in as Madison Rixby myself here. And so you can basically see that Madison can, see all the different things that happened. She can obviously also, post new things from the Chatter desktop. So she could say, I am attending a great webinar right now, and share this, and we would then post it from, as James pointed out, using RESTful APIs, we're interacting with the Chatter service and are able to basically, post new things to the service. And then also, of course, whenever something happens in the service, we actually poll, with kind of like a smart polling mechanism, and we would actually display any new updates that you need to know straight to the desktop. And, obviously the richness of Adobe technology allows us to do also pretty cool things like if you think about a use case where often you obviously would want to share content, any kind of file. And typically you would go, through like a little attached dialog where you could basically say, okay, now I want to look up from my computer what to share. But so, of course, with Adobe Flex running in my Air application here, I can do simple things as, basically just grabbing this file here, dragging it over to the Chatter desktop, and you basically see that I can just drop it right here, and it'll automatically, generate a new feed post to me. I could now, add text, don't have to though, and I could basically just hit the share button and just see that we automatically upload the file into our Salesforce Chatter network, and now it's actually available within Chatter, and I shared it with, the entire company that is connected to the Chatter network. So pretty cool desktop client that we actually built, and this is obviously only one example of, an application that you can build with Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com, and deploy it as an Air application. So if we move to the next slide, unfortunately I have to go through this here again. So let's talk about Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com. Like I said, it's been out there for the developer preview since October of last year. The GA release was released, I think in July 19th, so actually a couple of months ago. It is available for download at developer.force.com/Flash Builder, and there's actually a whole bunch of information available there. But if we look into the details, I mean, now we've given you an overview of what Salesforce.com is and what the Force.com platform looks like. James gave you an overview of what the Flash platform looks like. And just to kind of refresh your memory for those who are not new to Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com, but also for those that are new, here's how we actually combine the two platforms and the two technologies to enable you to build applications on our Force.com platform, but with an Adobe front end. And as James pointed out also, you can run Flash and Air applications. So one of the benefits, of course, is that you can actually you can write something and you can run pretty much the same code base in the browser, and you can also take it to you on the desktop and then run it in disconnected mode. But anyway, if we look at this diagram very quickly, here on the right-hand side, you see Force.com. And from a server perspective, obviously we have as James also pointed out, we have our web service API that's typically SOAP-based. And then we also have a sync infrastructure that allows us to synchronize certain data that is in Salesforce.com or Force.com to any kind of client device. And we have an admin console that allows you to define what that data is or what the bucket of data is you want to sync. On top of that, from a developer perspective tool, we also have a Force.com IDE, which allows you to, for example, create new objects programmatically in Salesforce.com or on Force.com. So it's an integrated development environment, Eclipse-based. And so James talked about Flash Builder, which is also an Eclipse-based or the Eclipse-based development tool that you use to build Flash applications. And so obviously the number one thing that we wanted to do is combine those two into one integrated IDE. And so what you basically get with Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com is Flash Builder, and then also Force.com, the Force.com IDE, all in one integrated development environment, and you can basically switch perspectives back and forth, do your backend development in the Force.com IDE, and then switch over to the Flash Builder IDE, and then basically do all your front-end development. If you look into what we added to Flash Builder, and James will actually demo this in a little while, is we added Force.com discovery and introspection capabilities. So obviously, out of the box, Flash Builder doesn't really know anything about Salesforce.com. So we made it, if you will, Salesforce and Force.com aware, and you can introspect, your objects and the metadata that you have in Salesforce and Force.com. And then also, as we wanted to enable developers to build Force.com and Salesforce.com look and feel like applications that kind of expose users to the same behavior they're used to from the online UI, we built Force.com UI components that are pretty smart in the sense that they look into the metadata that we actually got from Force.com and Salesforce.com, and then they render particular UI pieces exactly like they would appear in the online app, and so that gives you a very nice user experience, and pretty much the same user experience as in parts of the online UI. And obviously, the great thing about that is that you don't have to retrain your users for your desktop application. But so that's it from a developer's perspective. And then for the data sync part, we also incorporated a very nice piece of technology from Adobe called Lifecycle, data management services. So what the data management service does in essence is it's acting as our sync engine. So it basically takes care, or it manages the data that has to flow back and forth between the desktop application and the Force.com platform and Salesforce.com. And it also gives you things like it is, for example, connection aware. So one of the nice things that the data management service provides is that all the interfaces of Force.com, so all the different things that you could do on data, like create, update, delete, all these kind of things, are exposed through the data management service. And you primarily, as a developer, would interact with that. And then the data management service knows whether or not you are connected currently, or the application is connected. And if it's not connected, it knows how to store in the local data store. And then as you would be connected, it knows how to talk to Salesforce.com and sync the data. So we, in essence, completely took the Salesforce Sync technology off the table. That's something that you completely don't have to worry about when you build applications on this new platform, which is nice because again, you can let us take care of the hard things, and you can basically concentrate on building your application and put the business logic behind it. We even put a little conflict resolution system into the system or into the platform. So of course, every time you sync data, there could be conflicts. We actually give you a pretty elaborate framework to handle those conflicts as well. So that's kind of like the architectural overview. Just very quickly, how it works. So like I mentioned before, it's one integrated development environment with the Adobe Flash Builder IDE and the Force.com IDE. So this is like your one-stop shop for developing. Within Flash Builder, obviously, you have a very powerful code editor and design view. We will see that a little later on. I mentioned those pre-built Force.com UI components, the pre-built data management and data synchronization. And then, as I also mentioned before, and James as well, the nice thing is you can deploy either to the browser, as a Flex application or Flash application, or you can run it on the desktop as an Air application. So it gives you a lot of capability. However you run the application, obviously the backend always runs in the cloud, so you also get all the benefits of that. I thought, maybe as a quick update, what is new in the GA release from the developer preview release? So, three things. First, the developer preview was desktop applications only. Now with the GA release, we let you build both desktop and Flex applications. Another thing is Salesforce.com. For those that are a bit more familiar with it, we're a very dynamic environment. It's very easy to change, for example, the underlying data schema in Salesforce.com. So we support that now out of the box. Our sync logic automatically adapts as you change the Salesforce schema and also our UI components. And then also we will see in the demo the entity container UI component, which actually is able to render an entire detail page for you out of the box with pretty much one line of code. So those are, in essence, the top level of the major features that we added in the GA release. The three use cases that we want to address with Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com haven't really changed. So the first one, obviously, occasionally connected apps. So this will be the classic desktop or Air use case where you would run an application on the desktop in a connected or disconnected mode. The second would be extending our service with rich CRM extensions. That's actually something that people have done for a number of years now with the Flex toolkit that Adobe and Salesforce had put out there some time ago. But now we kind of formalized that use case with Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com. And then last but not least, obviously, you can also build complete custom applications, rich custom applications with this technology. So the idea here would be you build a backend on Force.com, and then the entire front end would be Adobe-based, and you could do really cool things like in this application, which is kind of like an e-commerce storefront, and you can spin things around and drag and drop them into your shopping cart. But I think I talked enough, and you guys really want to see what this all looks like. So let me hand it over to James again, and James will give you a demo, and we'll also dive into the code, and we'll see what this is all about.
Great. Thanks, Marcus. So I'm going to just jump into Flash Builder for Force.com and show you guys how you can get started building an application that will talk to Salesforce and pull in some data, store it locally for offline usage. And so I'm going to dive into some Flex code and some ActionScript code and show you how this all works. So first thing I'm going to do in Flash Builder for Force.com is just come in and create a new project. So my project is going to be this Force.com Flex project, and I'll give it a name. Let's call it Hello World. And then I can specify if I want it to be a web application or a desktop application and what Flex SDK to use. And that's all just fine. So I'll just hit finish. So now here is my basic Flex application. And in this application, I can start to actually hook this up to the Force.com infrastructure. You can see already for me, it's giving me this F3 desktop application. And that's the basic way that I'll start to connect to Force.com. There's already some other infrastructure in here to log in to Force.com, and then just some basic UI controls to allow the user to do that. And then once they're logged in, we can say it'll have just a label that says put your components here. So just without doing anything, I can run this application, and you'll see what we just have out of the box with this application. So there we go. We have the Salesforce.com login. I can give it my login here and hit login. And now it's going to go to Salesforce.com and do a login, verifying my credentials. And once that's done verified, then we should see that little, let's see, there it goes. So now we get put your components here. So that's just what you get out of the box. And so now we can start actually adding some UI components, our custom UI components, and hooking this up to pull specific data in. I could go into design view in Flash Builder and start dragging and dropping components onto the screen. You can see it gives me a preview of what's happening there, lists the different components that are custom to Salesforce. And so that's all great, but I'm going to show you some code. So first thing I'm going to add into this application is just a simple way to list my accounts. So I'm just going to add into here a data grid, and I'm going to set some properties on my data grid. First, I'll give this an ID, call it DG, and I'm going to set some other properties. I'm going to set the width to 100%, and I'll set the height to 100%, and then I'm going to specify some columns on my data grid, and then specify a data grid column, and set the data field on this first column to be the ID, and then add another data grid column, and set the data field on this one to be name. So I'm just going to list my accounts, their ID, and their name. So that's all we need to do to display a data grid. I'm also, the container that this data grid is in, I'm going to set a couple properties on this one. I'm going to set the width to 100% and the height to 100% as well. So that's my UI initially. So now let's actually make a request to Salesforce.com to get my accounts. So to do that, there's an action script login complete handler here. So this is the function, the action script function that's actually going to get called once my application has successfully logged in. So once the user has entered the right credentials and hit login, then we will call this function. And so now is where we actually want to make a query to Salesforce.com. So I'm going to do app, that's defined up here. This F3 desktop application, its ID is app, so that's how I access that. So I'm going to do app.wrapper.query. And now I can do a SOQL query, if you're familiar with SOQL from using Salesforce.com for anything else, same SOQL language. So now I can just do select star from account. And then the second parameter that this query function takes is a responder. So this is a way that once we get this asynchronous callback from having successfully done this query, then we will call a function. So what I need to do is create a new async responder. So async responder, there we go. And then this takes two functions as a parameter. So we're going to give it a result function. So that's when it completes successfully. And then there's also a fault function. So for the result function, I'm just going to enter a new function here. And the first parameter of this function is the data that we get back, and that comes back as an array collection. And then the second parameter is just this token object that may get passed along. And then this function returns void. And so now in the body of the function, here's where we actually tell it what to do when we get the data back from doing that select. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell my data grid that its data provider is equal to data. So that's just the data that got passed into this function. Okay. So then I also need to specify the function in case we get an error. So I'm just going to specify new function, and the parameter of this one is just going to be some object returns void, and then let's close out that line of code. So that's it. So that's how we make the query. And when we do this query, it will do the offline cache for us. And so if we did this query and we were offline and we had the data cached locally, then that query would just run just like it would if we were connected. So let me save this, recompile this application, and run this again. And let's see if we get the data this time. There we go. Let me log in again. And we're logging into Salesforce. And then there we go. So this is our data grid now displaying our accounts. So we got all of our accounts. We see the IDs and the names. So that's great. But I want to show you one of the other components that we can use in these applications if we want to actually be able to edit this data. So to do that, I'm going to come in and down below this data grid, I'm going to add another component here. The data grid is a component that just comes out of the box with Flex, but as Marcus said, there was some other additional components that were created specifically for integration with Force.com. So I'm going to use one of those components, and it's this field container. And so in this field container, I'm first going to give it an ID, call it ACC, and then inside of the field container, I'm going to specify this label and field. So this is a custom component that will display and allow me to edit a property on an object that I've synchronized into this application. So I'm going to specify the field that I'm actually going to allow to edit to be accounts.name. Okay, so that will allow me now to edit the accounts, the name on the account, and then I'm going to have a button that will allow the user to actually save the changes that they've made. So I'm going to add a label here as save, and then we need to actually hook this up so that we'll do all the work. So the first thing that we need to do to hook this up is when the user selects something in the data grid, then we actually want to display what they've selected down here in this field container. So to do that, I'm going to add a change event handler to the data grid. And so this is an event that gets thrown when the user selects something in the data grid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell ACC that its field collection is going to render the item that the user has selected in the data grid. So to get to that selected item, I'm going to say dg.selectedItem. But this, you'll see here that it's requesting that this object be of type IManaged. And so in order to be able to get the account object as an IManaged object into this field container, what I can do is I can actually generate the client-side objects that are the generated objects from my server-side definition. So to do that, before I complete that line of code, what I'm going to do is come down here to this Data Services tab and say Connect to Data Service. And then I'm going to follow this wizard where I actually will specify my enterprise WSDL from Salesforce and hit Finish. And now what it's actually doing is it's going out and it's querying all of my object definitions that I've defined on Salesforce. So all the out-of-the-box objects, all the custom objects, any modifications I've made to these objects, and then it's actually going to code gen out the ActionScript objects that are associated with the objects defined on Salesforce.com. So it takes a minute there because I have a ton of objects in my instance of Salesforce.com. So we'll give it a second while it's generating that code. So once we get the code generated, there we go. What we'll actually see here is a list of these data types that it's generated. So we'll see now all the different objects that were defined in my WSDL, and so we can go take a look at like account and see all the properties that are defined on that. We'll see all the custom fields, everything there. So and then we can actually go see all of the generated code. If you go take a look here in this directory, we'll see tons and tons of ActionScript objects that were generated. The one that we're going to be using now is this account.as. So account.as, this is really just kind of a placeholder. It extends the super account, so we can make some modifications to this object if we want to. But that's the object now that we'll use here as that IManaged object that will pass in to this render call. So now what I need to do is actually cast the selected item as an account object. So I'm going to make that cast, and when I do that, it should, let's go check up top, it should add an import statement there. There we go. So it imported that class. Now I'm using this new account class. I have to import it into this application. So I'm telling it to render that object into this field container, and then in my field container, I have the label and field object that will allow me to edit the account name. So the last thing to do is when the user clicks this save button, we actually want to push this change to our local database and up to Salesforce.com. So I'm going to add a click event handler to my save button, and when the user clicks this button, then let's call the ACC dot field collection dot update object, And so what we're doing is telling it to update this object, but we need to give it a responder. So I'm going to, again, create a new async responder and then specify a function for the result handler. So just like before, we get a function here that takes an object and then a token object as the parameters. Let's put in those, returns void, and now let's write the code where it's actually going to make the save call. So we will call the ACC. What is it? 1 second. Oh, nope, sorry. app.wrapper.save. Then we pass it the item that we're actually going to do the save on, and I believe that's just the object that got passed into this function. Is that right, Marcus? Yep. Okay. And then also I will cast that to an account. And so that's what will happen when we call this update object function. And then I also need to put in a function here to handle the case of the error, so which hopefully won't happen if I've written this code correctly. And so I'll just leave that empty and then close out that line of code. Okay, so we're calling update object and then calling save to save those changes. So now let's try to run this again and see if we actually have a way to edit the account name. So here we go. Let's log into Salesforce.com. And we should get, there we go. There's my list of accounts just like before. And then below that, need to do one little UI change here. Well, let's try it, see if it works. Yeah, I need to reposition this container to have a little bit more padding there at the bottom. Let's save that and try this again. And let's do one other quick thing here. On my field container, I don't really want to display this field container unless the user has actually selected something in the data grid. So what I'm going to say is visible, and then I'm going to use what's called a binding expression, where I'm going to tell this thing to evaluate this expression, and when it evaluates to true, then the field container will display. So what I'm going to evaluate is say when the data grid selected item is not equal to null. So when there is something actually selected, then make that container visible. So now let's run this one more time. And then let's see in debit mavericks.demo, my username, and log in. So now we see we're not seeing that field container until we've selected one of these. So let's go select an account. There we go. And then we should be able to edit the account name. Okay, I see why I can't see it. Need to also set the width to 100%. Forgot that one little thing. It wasn't wide enough to actually show us the account there. Let's try this one more time. So dev@mavericks.demo. So one of the new features coming up in the next release of this will be OAuth support, so I won't have to keep entering my username and password. We're very excited about that new feature. Okay, there we go. So now we see the container there that will allow us to edit the account name, and now I can come in, double-click, take me into edit mode, and make a change here. And then when I click out, you'll see it shows it as this pending change, and then I can hit save, and now you'll see it's actually made the change in my data grid. But it's also made that change on Salesforce.com as well. So if I close down the application or went into Salesforce.com, we would see that that application has been persisted. If I was offline, it would wait until we connect back up to synchronize that change back to Salesforce.com. And then there's also the whole conflict management option that allows us to detect conflicts, handle conflicts when they arise, when multiple people have made changes to the same version of the data. So all that stuff is just built in and we get for free with these applications, with the Force.com components. So I wanted to show you how we can totally start from scratch and be able to build an application that has all those features, the ability to do these field containers, label and field really quickly, build applications that pull down data from Force.com, synchronize it locally for offline access, allow us to edit that data, do the conflict resolution. All that stuff is just really easy, few lines of code, and we're able to get that started. So I want to show you a more complete example now. So we have this Opportunity Watcher application that's actually a sample application that you can get and start looking through the code on this when you download Flash Builder for Force.com. And this is a much more complete application, all built here with the same infrastructure that I've showed you. So let me run this application and show you what this one looks like. So you can actually get all the code for this and go through this code on your own, but I'll walk you through a little bit of it today. So let me log into Salesforce.com with this one. And with this one, what we'll see is I'm going to see all of my opportunities and accounts. We're going to also pull in chatter. So we see we've pulled in all the chatter records on my org. I can go into a specific opportunity here, and then we'll see this nice display of this particular opportunity. And Marcus mentioned earlier, one of the great features here is being able to just give an object to the object container and let it then render the whole object just as it would on Salesforce.com for us. So this is really just like one line of code. I'll show you that in a second. And then we can also use Flex to display some really fancy charts. We can have the chatter. In this case, there's not any for this account. We can then make changes. We can refresh this. We can begin following the chatter for this specific opportunity. So let me show you a little bit of the code behind this. But this is a really great application. Definitely encourage you to check this out on your own. Pull the code into Flash Builder for Force.com. It's a great way to learn how all this stuff hooks up. So let me go through just a little bit of the architecture here. So we're using an MVC architecture in this application. There's commands, so we can go in and see the commands in the controller. And this is how we actually will handle like a query. So we can go in and see when we do a query, you'll see this code looks very similar to what I showed before. We're using that wrapper, doing a query, giving it a responder, telling it what to do when we get the complete event, what we do when we get a fault event. Then we can go see the views. So in the MVC architecture, here's the views. We can go see like a pie chart. So we want to render the pie chart for these opportunities. This is how we do it. We just have a simple pie chart that just uses our model and then renders that data that we've pulled down from Force.com into this pie chart. So really simple, using the foundation that I showed you in that simple Hello World application, we can now go to a much more complex, much fuller application for displaying these opportunities, all the chatter feeds, charts, and all those sorts of things. So we can go in and see in the opportunity modal dialog, we can go see the entity container that Marcus was referring to. So this is the only line of code that it takes to actually create that whole editable UI for an entire object. So that pulls in all the information on Salesforce.com, all the metadata about that particular entity, and creates that whole edit screen for us. So that's how easy it is to use these components and get started building these applications. So definitely encourage you to download the code for that Opportunity Watcher application and go through that as a way to learn how to actually create a real-world application with all these tools. So now I'll pass it back to Marcus so we can talk a little bit more about some of the benefits here. And then at the end, we'll show you one other real quick demo, a mobile demo of this stuff as well.
All right, thanks a lot, James. Great demo. So as you can see, with Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com, you can obviously build pretty cool applications. If we talk about the business and end user benefits, obviously, if you build those highly interactive and expressive UIs, I mean, you improve the decision-making support of your users. There's very powerful desktop integration, and of course, it's a faster and lower-cost way of delivering apps. Given that everything runs in the cloud, you can very quickly develop on Force.com, and then Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com allows you to build very rapidly, very quickly, very nice front ends, whether they run in the browser, on the desktop, or as we actually see in a few minutes, on the mobile device. Actually, I thought I'll give you a little bit of an outlook on what's coming next. So obviously, this is the first GA release, version 1, if you will, but we're already thinking about version 1.1. So one of the, few of the things that I want to highlight here is that James already mentioned that we will have support for OAuth 2.0. So that's a new login mechanism where we actually don't store the username password on the local device, but use actually a web-based authentication mechanism and then only store a token. Other things, just to point out highlights here, the new Aloha skin. So you saw that the UI components that are currently in Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com they look basically what is now, I guess, the Salesforce.com classic UI. So we will update those to the new kind of blue and white color scheme. We're thinking about new list view components. So similar to the entity container, James showed you how to hook up a data grid, but in Salesforce, if you're familiar with it, there's a concept of a list view, which is kind of a data grid, but a little bit of added functionality. So we're thinking of providing pretty much the same functionality as we do with the entity container, where all you have to do is say, I want to render the entity container and I want to render an opportunity, and we basically render the entire opportunity detail page for you. In a similar fashion, we would render the entire list view for an object in Salesforce.com, and it would be, the list view itself would be a data grid that you can resort, you can inline edit in the data grid, you get the Rolodex, you get your custom list views that you can define in Salesforce.com. So those are, and you can, obviously read the list of the complete list of features yourself. But so these are some of the highlights that we're thinking about for the V1.1 release. And I guess with that, if you want to learn more about Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com, as I mentioned before, you can download it today from developer.force.com/Flash Builder. It's available obviously for Windows and for Mac. Also, there's actually a great Force.com workbook tutorial for you to start building your first RIA application on Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com. So it's a little inventory management app that we built on our Force.com platform, and the tutorial 10 is how to build an offline client or a desktop client that can work in disconnected mode for this inventory management app. And then, of course, we have our global cloud gathering here in San Francisco again this December called Dreamforce. It's a great event. If you haven't been, you should definitely go. I think we're expecting 20,000 plus people. So it's going to be a huge event at the Moscone Center in San Francisco from December 6th till 9th. And I guess before we open it up for Q&A, let's just quickly do our mobile demo, and then we'll be back for Q&A. So James, why don't you take the mobile demo away?
Sure. So I wanted to show you just kind of a preview of some of the stuff that we're beginning to work on the Flex side. So we're currently working on enabling Flex applications to run on mobile devices. And so to do this, we have Adobe Air on an Android device. And this is something that'll be out soon, officially soon. There's a pre-release that you could join on labs.adobe.com if you want to start playing with this today. But what I did was I took some code very similar to the code that I've just shown you earlier, and then just turned it into a more mobile-friendly application. So I'm going to launch this application here, and what that's done is it's actually pulled down my accounts from Force.com. And so now I can swipe through these accounts. I can go into an account and see the details for this account. If I wanted to call Tom, I can click on that. That will open up the phone, allow me to call him, and I can do email and SMS and all those sorts of things as well. But one of the things I also integrated in this application was the ability to use the Android camera to actually go out and take a picture. So here we go. I can, that's not Tom, but that's my Starbucks from this morning. I can take a picture of that. And then here we go. We hit. I took a picture of my Starbucks, and then added that to that account for Tom. So this code took very little time to build because I used Flash Builder for Force.com and similar code to what I've shown you this morning. There we go. There's the coffee cup. Thank you. And this also synchronized up to Salesforce.com when I made that change. So just wanted to give you a little preview of the stuff that we're working on the Flex side with Air for Android, and then we'll also be taking Air to BlackBerry and a number of other smartphones in the future. Now let's open it up for questions.
All right, yeah, thanks a lot, James. So very exciting. Basically, of course, what that means is with Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com, you can already build cross-OS platform on Windows and on Mac, and obviously you can always build for the browser, but so then in the future, we can also build cross-device, so you can actually take your Stratus applications to the mobile device. So now Q&A, as I mentioned in the very beginning, there's a webinar survey that we'd like you to participate in. Here's the URL on the screen, and as you complete the webinar, you will basically be entered into our little, into our little drawing for the Adobe CS5. So please, if you would, complete this webinar and let us know how you like this, the survey, and let us know how you like this webinar. But so now to the Q&A. Will this recording be available? Someone asked. Yes. We will actually send up some follow-up emails to everyone who registered for this, and we will make this available absolutely. Let's see, you want to pick one, James?
Sure. So if you already have Flash Builder installed and you want this plugin, currently we only provide Flash Builder for Force.com as a whole package. So there's no way to install today this into an existing Flash Builder install. So I think the only way to do this would be to install another kind of version of Flash Builder with the Flash Builder for Force.com plugin. Is that something that we're working on or thinking about, Marcus, for adding like a plug-in way to do the install? Or
Yes, yeah. Currently the way how you install the product is, if you go to developer.force.com/Flash Builder, it's all one package. So we wanted to make it as easy as possible. But in a later release, we'll actually register our Eclipse plugins, and so then you can use the standard Eclipse mechanism.
Eclipse update site. Okay.
Exactly.
Great. So that's coming.
Let's see, another question. You mentioned caching earlier. What did you mean? When I do a query, do you cache the results? Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com, I can take this one, works actually a little differently. So what happens is every time you actually start an application, a desktop application that is, we actually, or the framework underlying and kind of almost unbeknown to you, actually executes a sync cycle with Salesforce.com. So it actually pulls the data into a local device, and what happens there behind the scenes is we actually reach out to Salesforce.com, introspect what your data structures look like. We create the offline database, create all the tables and the columns in there, and then actually do a full synchronization based on what you defined in our admin console, what you want to sync. And then actually the query that James showed you is then actually executed locally. But within Strata or within Flex, Force.com Flex, you can actually do you have two different types of connections you can make. One would be that sync connection that I just talked about. You can also do live connections to the Salesforce API. And so if you think back to this Opportunity Watcher demo that James showed you, you saw on the right left-hand side, there was a list of opportunities. That's actually where we use the syncing. So we sync that data into the local cache, if you will, into the local database, and then executed queries locally. But the chatter records that we pulled in for all those opportunities that we had persisted locally, that was actually a live connection, and it's one shared connection object that you can use. So you basically only log in once as the user, and then you can, as a developer, decide how you actually manage that data. Very cool.
Great. So there's another question here on, can several people edit the same data at the same time? And so we don't do any specific kind of locking on the data to prevent this. What we do is we kind of just try to handle this when there's a conflict. So what that means is that the first person who makes a change to the data, that change will go in fine. But then the second person who tries to change that data, they'll get a conflict event, and then it will be up to them to resolve that conflict event and either overwrite the previous person's change or choose to pull in that change into their environment. So we handle that in kind of a retroactive basis. When those conflicts occur, we don't try to enforce locking in any way.
So let's see another one. Can I build a storefront with Flash Builder? Absolutely. You can. The sky's the limit in terms of what you can build. So obviously, you can build any application on our Force.com platform, and then with Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com, you can put the richest possible user interface on top of it. In fact, as you think back about the three business use cases that I talked about, one was actually the custom cloud, the complete custom rich application. That was actually a storefront, and it was very cool. We can maybe, we can probably share some of those libraries of what people have built, but very nicely done with, like I said before, you can, spin things around, zoom in, zoom out, drag and drop into your shopping cart and all these kind of cool things. So yeah, absolutely possible. And another one here is the download site says a Flash Builder Premium Edition license is required for Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com. If I obtain a license, can I still use the same IDE for non-Force.com Flash development? Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So there's there's the option to create just a standard Flex project when you're in the Flash Builder for Force.com IDE. So you can either create just standard Flex applications, or you can create Flex applications for Force.com. Both of those are fully supported in Flash Builder for Force.com.
Excellent. Let's see, we probably have time for one or two more. When will the version 1.1 be available? So we're shooting to have actually some parts or some of those features delivered in time for Dreamforce. So hopefully we will have already an update for Dreamforce, and then maybe the entire list of features will be available throughout the first half of next year. But come visit us at Dreamforce. You will actually be surprised how much we'll get done. What is the benefit of using this over Visualforce? Well, one of the benefits is that Visualforce obviously runs only in the browser, so you cannot take it to the desktop. So while there's obviously nothing wrong with Visualforce, it's also great technology to very rapidly build custom applications on Force.com. It does not run offline or on the desktop. And so that's obviously one of the most obvious benefits of using Flash in a lot of use cases. And let's see, maybe one more. I have a nice one here for James. Is this mobile version available for iPhone or iPad?
So right now we're working on Air for Android, and that'll be the first mobile platform that we support for the Air runtime on mobile devices. And then we're working with a number of other mobile providers, so BlackBerry and Windows Phone 7 and Nokia and a bunch of others. And for iPhone and iPad, we also have a technology called Packager, and that will take a Air application and package it into a native iPhone, iPad application. And so you can find more information about that on labs.adobe.com. That's something that the Flex SDK will enable you to use sometime in the future. So that's currently a Labs project, and we'll be enabling that in Flex sometime in the future. So check out labs.adobe.com for more information on the packager.
All right, very quickly, two more. And within less than a minute, let's see, how much data can be stored on my local machine? Actually, the underlying SQLite database doesn't really have any size limitation. Our sync infrastructure usually has a limitation of 5,000 records per entity in your data set, so that actually can already grow pretty quickly, but we can also up that limit. However, from an offline perspective and storing into the local machine's data store, keep in mind that obviously the more data you sync, the longer the sync cycle takes, and also the more data you sync, the more likely it is that you run into conflicts. So we encourage people to keep those local data stores as small as possible. But I mean, we can actually sync quite a bit of data. And then the last one that I will answer is, can you upload attachments? Does the offline sync support this? So currently the offline sync does not support attachments, but as I mentioned, we have two different types of connections in Force.com Flex or Adobe Flash Builder for Force.com. And you can actually check if you're online as you do with the sync, and then the documents or attachments that you actually have on the local device, you can then use a live connection into Salesforce.com to attach those to any record in Salesforce.com. Is actually something that a customer has done very successfully for signature capture, works like a charm. But in the long run, we will also hopefully add attachments to the out of the sync. Then, okay, one more for James that I see here. Adobe Sales is not aware of this offering. What do we do?
I think if you just go to the Flash Builder for Force.com page, then there's instructions there for how to actually purchase the license. I think all that it really requires is a Flash Builder premium license. So you just get the download from the page on Salesforce.com. Make sure you have a Flash Builder premium license, and then you're good to go.
All right, I think that's it. Let me also mention, I think any questions that we didn't answer, didn't have time to answer here, we will actually follow up, either in the chat or maybe via email. Thanks a lot. Again, try to complete this webinar if you want to have a chance of winning a CS5 Master Collection. Again, thank you for participating. I hope you enjoyed this webinar. Thanks, James, for joining us.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll all see you at Dreamforce in December.
Thank you for participating in today's conference. You may now disconnect.